The UK is to start experiments in a bid to try to cool the planet by dimming the sun. Known as geoengineering, scientists have been given millions in government funding to use controversial climate change technology. But should humans really be interfering with global weather patterns? Hello and welcome to Roundtable. I'm Enda Brady. Now, UK scientists are set to launch weather experiments to block sunlight to temporarily slow the climate crisis. Projects include trying to thicken Arctic sea ice and make clouds more reflective. But is this really the best way to help solve climate change?
The UK is investing more than £50 million to dim the sun, as part of a new controversial experiment to find ways to reduce global warming. Known as solargeoengineering, it reflects sunlight back to space. So how does geoengineering work? Planes are used to release tiny particles to reflect solar radiation back to space. Boats spray seawater into the atmosphere to help low clouds reflect sunlight.
There is good evidence that this could be used to cool down the planet. And perhaps to reduce some climate impacts on vulnerable people around the world.
But critics argue it may lead to unpredictable weather patterns.
Among other things, when you deploy stratospheric aerosol injection, you can change atmospheric circulation patterns, and so this can do things like disrupt precipitation patterns, cause droughts in some places, cause excessive flooding in other places.
So should scientists be interfering in altering the Earth's temperature? And would it even make any difference?
Well, let's meet our guests. Here with me in the studio, we have Christopher Caldwell. He is CEO at United Renewables. In Exeter, in England, we have James Dyke. He is Associate Professor in Earth Systems Science. That's at the University of Exeter. And in Cambridge, in England, we have Pete Irvine. He's Editorial Director of SRM 360. That's a non-profit knowledge broker dedicated to informing people about solar geoengineering. Guys, you're all very welcome to Roundtable. Chris, to you first of all, in very simple terms, what are they trying to achieve here?
Sure. Well, this is part of an initiative that was set up by the last government to try and make exciting new science a reality. And one of the parts that this ARIA initiative is doing is putting £50 million into geoengineering. Geoengineering is the idea where we're already conducting a very large science experiment whereby we're putting large amounts of carbon into the atmosphere and we're seeing what happens. And largely that isn't a good thing, what's the results we're seeing. This is the idea that we can be reversing or slowing some of the impacts of climate change, global warming, by doing other things. Other things might be adding more. So there's 5 experiments that are being 5 outdoors experiments that are being done under this initiative. Principally, we're putting up like a balloon, either over the UK or the US, probably the US, releasing some particles into the atmosphere, watching it, how the reflections of the sunlight pushes back out again, and them being very responsible, they'll be collecting the particles, taking back in again. Another part of it is creating more ice sheets. It's basically ways of trying to see if you can reflect sunlight back up to try and slow down the main efforts, so the main effects of global warming.
Yeah. Pete, do you think we should be doing this? I mean, some people say humans have created the problem, therefore scientists should be fixing it. Do you think we should be interfering?
Well, I think we've got to recognize where we are with the climate crisis. It is caused by the buildup of CO2 in the atmosphere, and it's going to keep warming until we eliminate those emissions. Then it will stay warm more or less indefinitely until we pull that CO2 very difficultly, very slowly out of the atmosphere. In the meantime, the planet's going to be dangerously hot for decades to centuries. These solar geoengineering ideas offer a way to manage the heat that will come in a warmer world while we tackle these other issues. We're not sure if it's right to go ahead with these, but I believe we're in such a dire situation that we really need to carefully consider all of our options.
James, just come in on that point. So what we're hearing from Pete, it's so bad, we have to take action now. We have to do this. Do you agree?
It's actually much worse than most people think, and we absolutely have to take action. And as Pete just said, the thing that we need to take action about is to rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Until we phase out coal, oil and gas, we are going to continue to drive the concentrations of those gases in the atmosphere higher. We're going to continue to see more warming. We're going to continue to see more loss and damages. And if we're unlucky, we could risk catastrophic climate change sometime over this century. I mean, there's already increasing evidence that climate change is accelerating. So that's all I think now becoming established. What the question that you've got right now is, do we try and counteract one type of interference with the climate system with another type? And on that, I think the proposal to undertake geoengineering, solar radiation management is utterly unhinged.
So, James, just to go back on what you said, genuinely you believe we're at a tipping point and that the Earth is in very serious danger?
Yeah, I mean, arguably we've already crossed certain tipping points in the, let's say, the Greenland ice sheet, the Western Antarctic ice sheet. We might be seeing the slowing down of large ocean currents that might be operating in the Atlantic. Regions of the Amazon already becoming a source of carbon dioxide. The science on tipping points seems to be developing that the more that we look into these aspects of the climate system, in some respects, the worse it gets. Now, the conclusion of that science, I would like to think, is that we need to do everything that we possibly can to rapidly stop burning fossil fuels and also reform our food systems. What we can't allow policymakers to do is give them the option that somehow we can fix the existing and future climate damage with some other kind of technological solution. So whilst I'm actually quite a strong supporter of the blue sky research that can be conducted around solar radiation management or any kind of geoengineering, we can't be naive about what policymakers will very likely do with those possible future technologies, which is continue to skirt their responsibilities to implement really effective climate policy.
Chris, talking of policymakers, how frustrating for you then is it that President Trump, for example, the most powerful politician in the world, drill, baby, drill. You're wanting to move away from fossil fuels, and that's his response.
No, it is. It is deeply frustrating, and obviously in kind of ferocious agreement with James there. What we need to be doing. Okay, we need to be pulling back on fossil fuels, 100%. And that is the great risk of geoengineering, is that it is used as a lot of fossil fuel money is going into this space, and be it carbon capture and storage, or be it kind of space mirrors, whatever it might be. And they're using it as a shield, as a way of allowing them to be maintaining business as usual, doing what they're doing for longer. You know, because the longer they can keep on doing it, the richer they'll keep getting. We know exactly what needs to be done, and we know how long we have to do it, roughly. Latest IPCC reports is even more aggressive. We've got about 7 years to be dramatically cutting back and getting to net zero. If we spend an extra 4 or 5 years digging into this research here, it prompts to be a waste of time and a distraction, and also a way of us being pointed in the wrong direction. And it's being thinking that there's a false sense of security in there, and for policymakers and politicians around the world to be saying, no, it's okay, it's less urgent because we've got this great mass, this great plaster that we can be using, and it's bad.
And just tell me, Chris, your area of expertise, renewables. Yeah. You're obviously a believer that this is what we should be putting money towards.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If we focus in on renewables, in very large parts of the world, renewables are already cheaper than their fossil fuel equivalents. So we should be moving as rapidly as we can in that direction. We need to be changing the narrative, and instead of having the narrative around we'll all be going back into caves and all of the enormously negative messaging that has been predominant, we need to be talking about the future: clean air, clean water, being out of the pockets of fossil fuel companies and empires. It is a better, having energy security around the world. It's a better world, a better planet if we can transition away, and it also allows us to be thriving economically as well.
So, Pete, if the situation is genuinely as dire as you're saying, we see headlines all the time: warmest May, driest June, record-breaking ocean temperatures. There doesn't seem to be any urgency from the world's politicians on this.
Well, the world is moving on climate change. And I agree completely with Chris and James that we need to stay focused on cutting emissions. It's absolutely essential. But the world is currently spending about 2% of all GDP investing in clean energy. The world is moving, but it's going to take an enormous effort over decades to eliminate CO2 emissions. And in the meantime, the impacts of climate change will continue to worsen. And it's worth recognizing they're not going to fall primarily where we live, in the developed world. They're going to fall primarily on the poorest. And the fact is, many of the key impacts of climate change are really closely connected to heat, to the temperature of the planet. And solar geoengineering may offer a way to reduce temperature in the short term to reduce the harms that we suffer as a result of climate change.
So, James, to you, would you like to see more countries putting money into solar geoengineering like the UK is attempting to?
No, is the short answer. What I'd like them to do is to actually honour their commitments to the Paris Agreement and rapidly phase out coal, oil and gas and reform their food systems. If they do not do that at the same time as just increasing what is actually a very, very small amount of money. I know we get quite animated about this new call from the UK government. I mean, it makes headlines because pretty much no other government, maybe the US federal government, is putting some money into this. Most of the money is actually bubbling up in the corporate sector, which is an interesting story in itself. But no, look, I mean, governments can put a bit more into the solar radiation management pot if they like, but it's almost entirely immaterial. If we don't rapidly phase out fossil fuels, we are collectively cooked. And as Pete just said, it's the world's most poorest. They're most exposed to climate change, and they're the ones that are not only going to suffer first, but they are already suffering.
James, are there any risks to this solar geoengineering, do you think? Or is the risk not doing it in the first place?
Yeah, this kind of risk assessment, I think, is potentially problematic because if you've got potentially infinite climate impact risks, if we don't phase out fossil fuels, you could be looking at maybe the collapse of industrialized civilization, and then the risks and the costs are infinite, right? So even if you've got some risks of doing solar radiation management, it's kind of worth it. As we've already heard, there's the risk of moral hazard. By providing policymakers with the potential that we might be able to somehow fix our climate impacts in the future, you're allowing them a way out of not doing what is, yes, the difficult political thing of phasing out fossil fuels. But really, one risk that people don't appreciate is that it's further interference with the climate crisis. I mean, every major environmental challenge that we've had, we've solved by essentially stopping the pollution. So if you look at the Montreal Accord, the Montreal Protocol, which phased out ozone deploying CFCs, when you think about the ending of acid rain, which came from us stopping high sulfur burning coal, and then basically let the climate system recover, you let the Earth system heal. What we are doing with the deliberate interference through radiation management is attempting to fix one problem by what's probably going to introduce a whole series of other problems. And I know a lot of the research focuses on that. I'm quite interested in it. What does it do climatically? But it's also going to open up a Pandora's box of new risks around attributing climate damage, because what happens when the United States undergoes sulfate injection and then the monsoon in India stops or is significantly disruptive? We can't even organize ourselves to do the much simpler thing, which is manage the available carbon budget. I allocate fairly the amount of carbon we've got before we shoot past 1.5 or 2 degrees. How we're meant to regulate global explicit geoengineering is, I just find, completely mind-boggling, and something that very few people are really talking about.
Chris, on that point then, would you welcome regulation?
I think that's an entirely moot point. It's an interesting academic conversation, but the problem is it'll never happen.
Why not?
Because, it took us 21 COPs to get to Paris. And that was with relatively established science. It's taken us another 7 or 8 years to get anywhere close to leveling off in our carbon emissions. If we have 7 years left, And the science is less settled, and it is so incredibly geopolitically difficult. We don't know what impacts, are we doing something here, what impact it'll have there. Trying to think that we're going to get a global consensus to be able to regulate something that is so unknown and so difficult to do. I don't think it'll, if it can happen, it won't happen in the time frame that is in any way material.
And it took so long to get the Paris Agreement, and yet one of the first things President Trump did was pull out.
Yeah, he did, and he pulled out last time as well. One of the I think it was actually his very first. The first item that he had on his desk in his first term, and it was done the first day here. Yeah, it's deeply unhelpful. But America is only 11% of world's GDP. There's still basically 90% of the planets who are trying to do things. They're trying to largely move in the right direction. The European Union seems to be even more committed than it was, because it's not only just Russia and Ukraine that's scaring them about oil. It's also losing LNG now from the US means there's more of a focus on renewables. China, of course, it built more solar panels in 1 year last year than America has done in its entire history. Like there's great examples of other parts of the world where there is very large amount of progress happening, and it looks like emissions are slowing down and leveling off on a global scale, which is a good thing. We need them to come down. We need them to come down quickly. But at least there will seem to be progress. Donald doesn't help, but there's progress in the rest of the world.
Pete, to you, just give us your thoughts on regulation then. Clearly, Chris feels it's never going to happen, but would you welcome it?
Well, it's challenging. I mean, we're at an early stage where the work that scientists are conducting primarily is in computer models. There's a few very small-scale field experiments. Some people believe this needs more controls, more constraints. I think the stuff that they're doing as part of the ARIA program is quite reasonable. They plan to only go ahead if the local community supports the work. The challenge with pursuing things at the international level is, as Chris was outlining, it's very, very difficult to get countries to agree. And for better or worse, solar geoengineering is one of those ideas that a single individual nation could push ahead on and change the planet. Unlike cutting emissions, where every nation on the planet needs to work together, and it's essential to cut emissions and eliminate them, internationally, agreements are very, very challenging.
James, to you, a lot of people will be watching, and look, we're all concerned about the climate and the environment. What can we be doing as families, as single people, on a tiny, tiny personal individual level? What can we be doing to collectively make a difference?
I mean, we can all do things that demonstrate that we're taking our own responsibility. So that the way that we travel, the things that we eat, maybe the house in which we live, the things that we buy. I mean, let's not forget that a significant amount of our emissions come from the things that we buy, the embodied carbon, the consumption-related emissions. And maybe that's something to think about, because when you look at who's most responsible for the climate crisis, it is a relatively small fraction of global humanity. You know, the richest 10% of the world's population are responsible for at least half of the consumption-based emissions. So if we individually and more importantly collectively want to see actual progress on reducing those emissions, rapidly phasing out fossil fuels, then I think we should focus on where most of the emissions come from, which is that small fraction of humanity, which is about consumption. So that might need new laws or policies. And so one thing that we can do is we can tell our politicians, our elected politicians, or we could even get involved in the political process ourselves to make those kind of systemic changes. So yes, there's things that we can do and we should do, and we could communicate those changes to other people. But if that's all that we try and do, we're not going to make the kind of scale that we need to. We need to get politicians and industrial leaders to act at the pace that the situation now demands.
Chris, is the message getting through to the general public then about fossil fuels?
It's a very good question, and it's a very complicated question. In general, yes, about 80% of the population feel that there is a need for climate action. Now, when you then kind of dig a little bit deeper, it isn't in the kind of the top 3, top 4, top 5 of the priorities list. Now, this is something that is existential. So we really do need to be trying to get it up that priorities list. I think there's been some failure in the messaging of talking about crisis, which does it's focused minds. At least people are aware of the issue, but we need to evolve that messaging. It serves its purpose to get us to where we are, where there is consciousness and there's an awareness and understanding of the issue. We need that messaging to evolve into something a bit more hopeful, to say that there is a better future, that there is an electrified world is a better world for us, our children, and for future generations. If we can get that, we can get to the point where there's a mass kind of movement in behind the change. At the moment, there's a lot of misinformation, which does need to be continually kind of bashed back and pushed back against, but there is a path forwards. And the first part of it is the awareness, which we have achieved.
Pete, just to you, the ethical question about geoengineering, do you think that the prize and the situation the planet is in is just so great that this is absolutely worth pursuing?
It's absolutely worth considering, researching, studying, and carefully debating. It's not clear if this is the right way forward. And just to stress again, it's absolutely essential that we eliminate CO2 emissions. But there's going to be an awful lot of suffering that will come with climate change while we do that. Solar geoengineering might offer a way as part of the solution to climate change that would reduce those risks. And that's why I founded my organization, srm360.org, so that the public, policymakers, and others could have an informed discussion about all the options we have on the table.
James, Chris has mentioned a 7-year window to basically make changes that will save the planet. When you look at that, it's not a very long amount of time, is it? 7 years is quite a short space of time, but there's no urgency. There doesn't seem to be anyone on TV, on radio, writing newspaper columns, no great urgency.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I'm completely behind the idea that we must give messages and narratives of hope. You can't have people like me just banging the drum of climate apocalypse and expect anything is going to happen. But, between us, we don't have 7 years. I mean, if we're thinking about the budget for 1.5 degrees Celsius, I mean, that's probably going to be gone within 5 years. And if actually the recent acceleration of climate change continues, and there's good reasons to think it will because of a whole series of changes in the feedbacks that seem to be happening, 1.5 is already gone, essentially. Long-term warming is in the process of surpassing 1.5, and it's not going to be very long until it's going to be 2 degrees Celsius later. So when you look at the collective changes of the planet, and then when you begin to just analyze the amazing work that the IPCC and other scientific organizations have done around the world, which explains what that means to different places in terms of, you've got a drought there, that food system isn't going to operate anymore. It is mind-boggling that we are not only seeing a lack of increase in ambition, but really around the world, net zero it's going backwards. We're seeing so much backsliding, not just across governments in the United States with the Trump administration, but across corporate worlds. Net zero action is stalling or sometimes going to reverse. The Responsible Banking Climate Coalition seems to be fragmenting. The energy majors, the oil and gas companies, are now they're being quite transparent about it, and they say, no, we're going to continue to be oil and gas companies. We're going to continue to burn significant amounts of fossil fuels well beyond the middle of this century. And this is madness. This is complete and utter madness. And the work that Pete does is very important. It's necessary. But what I would always urge you to remember is that policymakers, industrial leaders who have no interest in phasing out fossil fuels, who have no interest in what we might consider to be climate justice, will use those technologies, just that they use the wider technologies of net zero to argue that, we can just balance out carbon by the end of the century. They will use them to further delay. So if we don't see continued pointed pressure on those industrial leaders and politicians, I think our prospects could be very bleak.
Thanks, James. Chris, on that issue, if any political leaders are watching this roundtable, what would you say to them to hammer home the urgency of this?
This is existential. If you have got young people that you care about, in your life, be they your own children or young people other young people that you care about, you need to be taking action on this. We are running out of time. It is not fair for us to be enriching ourselves on the backs of our children and our grandchildren. That's exactly what we're doing right now.
Same question to you, Pete. Extraordinary work you're doing in this field. Any politicians, if you were to bump into, say, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, what would you say to make him change course and take this more seriously?
Well, I think the UK, in some respects, is a leader in cutting emissions. We've already halved CO2 emissions since the 1990s. There's a long way to go. There's lots of work to be done. And I'd say the UK should remain committed and push harder on cutting emissions. But I think it's also worth recognizing the UK is a leader in this field of solar geoengineering. And it's responsible that the UK government and other governments study this field, because if they do not put the money into studying solar geoengineering, largely it's not coming from the corporate sector, but it's coming from philanthropies. And they've got quite a different attitude and outlook on the world. So I think governments have got a key role to play in pushing for cutting emissions, adapting to make sure society can stand the impacts of climate change, and exploring all the options we have for addressing the risks it poses for us.
Pete, James and Chris, the clock has beaten us. Thank you so much for your insight on this one. That's it for this edition of Roundtable. Remember, you can see more discussion and debate on our YouTube channel. Just search for Roundtable TRT World. But for now, from me, Enda Brady, and all the team here, goodbye and thank you for watching.